Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. And collecting information about the activities of governments for almost 20 years. In that time, I've earned my stripes. I've been persecuted in every way, shape, and form, suffered tremendous deprivation, lived almost below the breadline for most of the time, had to move frequently to avoid serious problems. So when it comes to knowing what 2 and 2 makes, I believe that our organization is probably best qualified to tell you. Some of you may know about my book, which is called The Committee of 300. It's a very factual book. The book cannot be discarded in any way. I have been viciously attacked because of it, and I have been rounded on. But the book itself has not been attacked simply because nobody can attack it. It stands on its own. It has its own credibility. And that has characterized my work for the past 20 years. I've written over 400 monographs and works detailing the various acts through which foreign governments, in collusion with the United States, have robbed the American people of their heritage until we the people no longer exist. We the people today is merely a figment of speech, and we the people have stood by and allowed our nation and our heritage and our institutions to be usurped. And the latest in a long line of presidents who are willing to stand by and actively allow this to happen, take part in it, and indeed be in collusion with it. The latest man to ascend to the highest office in the land, former Governor Bill Clinton, now President Clinton, is merely another in a long line of succession of presidents who have been only too happy to work in collusion with a secret government. Now, a lot of people say, well, what secret government are you talking about? So let me be perfectly clear. If you have read my book, The Committee of 300, it is the story of the top-level secret government that has run the world for many, many years. And it takes its title from the old British East India Company, who had a committee of 300. They ran probably the biggest company the world has ever known, and that includes today's companies. If you consider their turnover in a single year, and I'm talking about in the 1790s, the 1800s, even allowing for inflation, their turnover exceeded that of Ford and General Motors combined in their heyday. That gave them the power to pretty well conduct themselves in any manner that they saw fit. And basically that committee has not altered its position. The players have altered, certainly. There are new people, but they are relatives of those who have gone before. This organization has hundreds of the most powerful companies interfaced with banks and the politicians of the world. And as I said, Mr. Clinton is merely the long line successor of those people. Excuse me. I don't know what it is, but every time I have to speak, I develop a terrible allergy. I do believe that it could be something to do with the type of speaking I'm doing. I've not had allergy problems the whole day, but tonight I have quite a severe one, so you'll have to bear with me if I choke and splutter a little bit. In times past, I've been hit by extremely low frequency radiation, and I usually carry a device on me which prevents that from happening. You may have seen this happen to President George Bush when he was in Japan. A couple of Russian KGB agents came into one of the anterooms near to where the president was having his dinner party, and they were from the Soviet military group, which is very much violently opposed to Washington. And they hit the president with a 15 gigahertz extremely low frequency radiation pulse, which knocked him right off his chair, under the table, and made him throw up all over the Japanese Prime Minister, which is not a bad idea. I think it's a fate that he richly deserved. But be that as it may, that is a type of attack that can be mounted against people like me, and I have suffered those attacks. And I carry something on me now which deflects that. But because our presidents have been willing to sell themselves to this committee, we are in the state that we are in today. Who is Mr. Clinton? President Clinton, as he now is. In his days at Oxford, Clinton attended every left-wing demonstration that there was against the Vietnam War. He lived in Hammersmith, and there was a big house there which was run by two of the top communists from the United States. And Clinton was in and out of this place like a revolving door. He also had at his disposal all the material that he needed to come across as a powerful leader in the anti-Vietnam War movement. And people wondered how it was that a student at Oxford could afford this kind of thing. Well, I'll tell you how he was able to afford it, because right from those days he'd already been brought to the notice of the Rockefeller family as a future candidate for high office in the United States of America. Clinton cut his teeth on public speaking against the Vietnam War. And he was not just, as he likes to tell us, in a passive role. He was very actively engaged in all of the demonstrations that took place. However, he saw for himself a future because he knew the Rockefellers were backing him. So he wrote a letter to one of his friends in the draft board and said, I really hate the Vietnam War. I hate it as much as I hate racial discrimination. But I want to tell you that this doesn't mean to say that I hate America. And he hedged his bets in every possible direction. When he came back and got into politics in the United States, he, as we know, became the governor of Arkansas. And there he married a lady by the name of Rodham, whose whole family came from a legal background. They were all lawyers. And they had their differences because President Clinton was very much of a ladies' man. He liked to run after all kinds of ladies. He was not exactly the type of person that you would think would be desirable to have as a president, since he was so lacking in moral character. The one incident that we all know about, the Jennifer Flowers episode, of course, is absolutely accurate. He certainly did have this long-standing affair with her. He certainly did do all of the things that she said. There certainly were tape recordings of his conversations with her, which were of a very low degree, I might add. And yet how strange it is that this man who was a Vietnam War draft dodger and who had this torrid affair with a girl who was not his wife, in spite of all of that, he was still able to become the President of the United States of America. And that ought to tell us something about the man, because I don't believe anybody else who was not picked by the Rockefeller clan would have been able to survive such a scandal. To start with, Clinton knows absolutely nothing about economics. He talks about economics in a sense that one is immediately impressed with his amateurishness. He talked about creating 8 million new jobs, and he said that I'm going to spend $20 billion. Well, an analysis of the situation shows that if he wants to create 8 million new jobs, he'd have to spend at least $80 billion. And even then it's not possible, because the structural deficit in this country is structured in such a way, and he doesn't know this, he never talked about it at all during the campaign, that the more money that you spend, our so-called economy based on spending, the bigger amount of money goes into paying off the federal deficit. It's like a vicious treadmill. You can't get off this once you get started with it, and the only way you're going to stop it is to stop paying money to the Federal Reserve Board, which is a private entity and which is not a government institution. And we ought not to be paying interest to the Federal Reserve Board, but Mr. Clinton, President Clinton, is going to go right along, and he's going to carry on doing that and urging everybody, indeed, to pay their taxes so that we can pay this obscene debt that we supposedly owe the Federal Reserve Board. I don't believe that anybody who is running for the office of president ought to be considered unless he has at least served some time in the military. I don't know how you can be the commanding officer of the greatest nation on earth and not have any military experience, nor do I see how you can possibly command people to go into battle when you yourself have been a draft dodger, and worse than that, when you've lied about it. And that is precisely what he did. But in order to understand Mr. Clinton, President Clinton, better, we need to know a little bit about some of his associates. And I was talking to somebody today, and they saw the CNN tape yesterday of the inauguration, and they had Mr. Mac McClarty on, and Mr. Mac McClarty is the new White House Chief of Staff. And he said to me, he looks like a very nice fellow. I said, yes, except that his company is presently under indictment by the Resolution and Trust Company because his company, ARCLA, of which he is the Chief Executive Officer, set up the Federal University Savings and Loan in Texas and then took it from a mortgage family business of $400 million a year to $5.4 billion a year, during the course of which they gave away money like a drunken sailor ordering drinks for everybody at the bar. One of the recipients of that largesse was Mr. Lan Benson, the son of Senator Lloyd Bentsen, who is going to be the Secretary of the Treasury. Lan Benson got $5.6 million from Mac McClarty's company, and he used that to buy a nice block of apartments. He didn't have to put up any guarantee of his own. His father did all that, his father being Senator Benson, now recently confirmed as Treasury Secretary. And he was able to buy this beautiful apartment complex without guarantees and only paying back interest on the money up until 1985, after which he stopped paying even that. So you, the taxpayer, you're going to pick up the bill for Mr. Lan Benson's block of beautiful apartments to the tune of $5.6 million. These are the kind of things that the American public should know. But you will never know them because you have censorship in this country. You have censorship by omission. That is to say, anything that you should know that is embarrassing to the establishment will simply not be talked about. That is why you'll find my book will never make the bestseller list. Mr. Clinton was heavily involved in the Iran-Contra scandal in Mena, in Arkansas. Mena was the center of the drug trade in the arms for drugs business that was going on down in Nicaragua and Honduras. And one of the people who wanted to get this investigated went to Clinton, and he was the representative for Arkansas, and he said, look, we have to stop this. We need an investigation into what is going on here. And Clinton said, well, there's no money in the Treasury. We can't do any investigating. So he went to the Congress, and he got money for this investigation, but it never got anywhere. The money stayed in the Arkansas State Police Fund, and it never got out of there. So there was never any investigation into the gun running and drug smuggling that went on in Mena, in southwestern Arkansas. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the President of the United States today. This gentleman was heavily involved in that, and he knew all about it. He knew exactly what was going on down there. And when he was approached and asked to launch an investigation, he prevaricated and he said, I don't know anything about it. I don't know how we can get it solved. And he went to the state police, and they didn't use the fund to investigate this matter. So he's completely in the clear with that now, and I don't suppose he'll ever be brought to account now that he's President of the United States. I already dealt with Mr. Benston. Mr. Benston's son, I told you, got money from the savings and loan industry. In addition to that, the Secretary of the Treasury is a big-time spender. He loves to tax and spend. He's one of the biggest people in favor of taxing and spending in the Congress when he was senator. So this is the new Secretary of the Treasury. So what we're going to have here, ladies and gentlemen, is more of the same thing, only worse. Mr. Clinton promised, when he was Mr. Clinton, that he would give an enormous tax cut to the middle class. He's recently backed away from that. Mr. Clinton, now President Clinton, told the gay lobby, which is very big and powerful, look, when I'm in the White House, I will immediately sign an executive order and you will be allowed to serve in the military. But behind the scenes, he was lobbied very vigorously by Senator Sam Nunn, who's the chief Democratic man with heavy defense connections and the man who is really quite knowledgeable about the defense industry. And he was told that he couldn't do that. And then he was also approached by Admiral Crowe. Now, Admiral Crowe is Clinton's chief advisor on military affairs. And he told Governor Clinton, now President Clinton, you cannot do this. This is absolutely an impossible goal for you to achieve. The final person who spoke to Governor Clinton, now President Clinton, was the chiefs of the Joint Staff, General Colin Powell, and he said, if you have these people in the military, I will resign, and I will publicly state the reason why. So Governor Clinton, President Clinton, had to back off. And he was just interviewed on CNN by Dan Rather of CBS 2 nights ago, and he was asked about this commitment, and he said, well, I don't back away from it, but I tell these people they have to obey military law and they'll have to conduct themselves in a manner that does not conflict with military discipline. But the truth of the matter is that on the insistence of his wife, co-president Hillary Clinton, he did sign an executive order, and he did issue this order saying that the gay people and lesbians must be allowed in the military. But what he didn't do was issue the enabling order along with it. So what we have now is a situation where these people will be allowed in the military, but they'll be disciplined by disciplinary boards and thrown straight out. And that's the kind of conduct that Mr. Clinton, Governor Clinton, President Clinton is famous for. He's backed away from just about every commitment he's ever made. And I've said many times that we today, as a nation, are further away from God than ever before with the Clinton administration. And what we can expect in the next 4 years is an American tragedy. And I've written a monograph about that, and it can be obtained at my table if you wish to purchase it. And in there, I tell the entire story about the past history of Bill Clinton, how he became governor, who his backers are, who all the powerful people are around him. And I've also done our newsletter this month. I publish a newsletter. It's more of a newspaper, a small paper. It's 32 pages, and probably the best information that you're likely to get. And in here, I've told the story of Clinton. And I depart from my usual ways. I never use notes or talk from notes when I speak. But I really would like to read this to you, because I believe that in itself, it contains vital information which, if I read, I know the psychology is that if something is read, you're more likely to remember it than if it's spoken. So with your permission, I'm going to read my own work to you from my latest newsletter. And this is called, Will the Real Bill Clinton Please Stand Up? The tumult and shouting, the posturing, the preening had hardly died down. The mob of job seekers who frequented the Democratic National Convention had hardly dispersed when President Clinton started breaking his election promises. At the instigation of Mr. Benson, we heard that there will not, after all, be a tax cut for the middle class. Instead, taxes will be increased to the tune of millions of dollars. Slick Willie says tax cuts were not a big issue in his campaign. That is what he told Dan Rather the other night. He said, well, tax cuts were not a big issue in my campaign. What actually happened? On researching newspaper accounts of his election promises, I quickly discovered that tax cuts for the middle class is what Clinton talked about the most. I'm pretty good at analyzing statements that people make and things that politicians say. And I did an analysis of every speech that Clinton made, and I found out that the majority of the time that he spent on the stump, he spent talking about tax cuts. But there he sat with Dan Rather saying, tax cuts was never a big issue in my campaign. It was the main part of Clinton's platform. How could anybody trust a man who's proven infidelity over a long period with Miss Flowers? How can he be trusted to keep his word? We should have known that the appointment of Benson to Treasury signaled lots of new taxes and no cuts. He is, after all, Wall Street's man in the Senate. Will any of the senators ask him about the special rush loan his son, Lan Benson, received from the now-defunct University Federal and Savings and Loan Company? And I talked about that already. The liberals who so avidly supported Clinton are now starting to realize that they have been had. They are already talking about keeping the heat on Clinton. Robert Bray of the National Gay Task and Lesbian Force and his fellow homosexuals are in for a big surprise, fervently supporting gay rights along with co-President Hillary Clinton, started on many different points and many occasions during his election campaign. And the gist of it was that when I'm president, I will avoid the ban on homosexuals and lesbians serving in the military. And we've already dealt with that. He will not issue the necessary implementation order, without which his order will not work. One of the most often expressed pledges made by Clinton was that he would oblige Congress and the White House to drastically reduce their bloated staffs, which, by the way, was a worthy goal. Both the White House and Congress carry a huge number of unnecessary staff members who should be axed. However, Clinton's worthy intention is like all those good intentions that pave the way to hell. Co-President Hillary will have none of it. Congressional leaders will have none of it. There are already 16 Clinton White House staffers, 3 more than Bush had, and reports reaching me say that co-President Hillary has still quite a way to go. The Children's Defense Fund and the National Organization of Women both demanded greater representation in the White House, and in a very private meeting with House Speaker Tom Foley and Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell, Clinton was told to back off from his campaign pledge of a 25% cut in the congressional budget. So there you have it. He's not going to keep his promise that the staff in the Congress, which is bloated and which costs millions of dollars of unnecessary money paid out every year, he said, I'm going to cut it by 25%, and he has no intention of doing anything of the kind. Now, this is the most interesting part for me. Clinton's claim that he is a Washington outsider should by now have been recognized for what it is. In a victory speech outside the old State House in Little Rock, Clinton talked up a storm about a new beginning, a need to return more power back to the kind of people who are in this crowd tonight. And I say this is good stuff, and that's what politicians are made of. But an analysis that I did of the kind of people in the crowd shows that it will be business as usual in Washington. Under the new president and co-president, a photograph showing the crowd listening open-mouthed that night was given to a friend of mine who specialized in analyzing crowd scenes and identifying people, and lo and behold, the results that I got back were startling. 85% of the people in that crowd, ladies and gentlemen, were the biggest insiders in Washington that you could get. They represented the insurance industry, the petroleum industry, the tobacco industry, Wall Street, foreign business representatives, and a whole slew of lawyers from the most powerful law firms in the country. It turns out that outsider Clinton was able to draw on advice and financial help from some of the top guns in Washington, who jockeyed for position before the 1992 election campaign even began. Apart from King Stevens, the largest single donor was the lawyers and lobbyists Goldman Sachs, and the largest single contributor was its co-chairman Robert Rubin, who gave $27,500 of his quote own money unquote. Approximately $400,000 in cash, goods and services was donated by big corporations to the Democratic Convention. Victory train tickets were reportedly sold at $5,000 per piece, so that lawyers, business leaders, lobbyists and special interest groups could party with congressional representatives on the ride from Washington to New York. If you still believe that your vote for Clinton counted, then you should think again. In addition, Mr. Clinton will back away from his election promise to tackle the deficit problem the moment he starts to warm the Oval Office chair. His much heralded promise to welcome Haitians was also mere election rhetoric. Now we know that he plans to encircle Haiti with Coast Guard vessels, which of course I'm not against at all. I think it's a good thing, but what I'm pointing out here is that this man promises one thing and then does another. Clinton did give power back to the kind of people in the crowd tonight, to quote him. The only thing wrong with that statement is that they'd never lost power. Derek Shearer was one of those who would have been a typical candidate for a big job had Clinton advisor Mickey Cantor not warned that Shearer was too far to the left and got him dropped from the consideration. Ira Magaziner, another Oxfordite, got the nod and the job Shearer should have got. Clinton favored Shearer because of his friendship at Oxford, and his wife Hillary liked Shearer's wife Ruth Yamato Goldway, whose father David Goldway expressed the family views in the Marxist-oriented journal Science and Society. And Goldway's ideas extended to his son-in-law Derek Shearer, who believed that government should operate a holding company to buy the controlling interest in every major corporation. Now that, of course, is strictly a Marxist idea. Let us look at some of the people now that Clinton says are his friends and that are outsiders and people that he turned to for help as an outsider. Charles Manatt and Mickey Cantor of the prestigious law firm Manatt, Phelps, Phillips and Cantor. The firm lobbied on behalf of Clinton and advised their clients that he was going to be the next president, long before anybody had ever heard of him. Cantor expected to get the top spot as overseer for the transition period, but one of his enemies snitched on Cantor's extensive tobacco industry connections, and he didn't get the job. Ron Brown, partner in the law firm Patton, Boggs and Blow. As chairman of the Democrat Party, Brown wielded a lot of insider influence. He was a senior partner in the prestigious Washington, D.C. law firm of Patton, Boggs and Blow. Brown is rather typical of those in the crowd tonight in that he mixed politics with law and lucrative business deals. If Brown is confirmed as Commerce Secretary, and he was, it will be as good as taking out a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal that the Clinton administration fully intends to operate under a business-as-usual flag of convenience. Nobody thought it wrong for Brown to retain his law firm partnership while chairman of the Democrat National Committee. Nor did the Senate hearing fault Brown for representing Jean-Claude Duvalier, the former Haiti dictator. Brown has a conflict of interest as long as your arm, and we wonder whether his services on the board of Chemex Technology, presently under investigation for possible fraud by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, will be called into question. These are the people that President Clinton has appointed to high office, and these are the people that a supine and weak Senate has confirmed to be in power in Washington for the next 4 years. These are all people that Mr. Clinton said he didn't know, and that he was a rank outsider trying to run as president and trying to represent we the people. We continue. R. James Woolsey Jr. was a member of the prestigious Washington law firm of O'Melveny and Myers, and later a partner in the Washington law firm of Shea and Gardner. Clinton was told by the Council on Foreign Relations, who are really his controllers, to give the job director of the CIA to Woolsey. This is very important. This man Woolsey has now got the top spot in the CIA, which Clinton was very happy to do when it was disclosed that Woolsey was a Rhodes Scholar. And we all know that Clinton's claim to fame was that he was a Rhodes Scholar, which is a scholarship run by the left wing. And Woolsey worked as a staff member of the National Security Council under Kissinger at the time when the National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft, who's done so much harm in Yugoslavia and in Iraq, was working with Kissinger. Woolsey did not register with the Justice Department as a foreign agent for the British electronics giant Plessy. The senators owe it to we the people to ask Woolsey about this, as well as what he knows about Michael Ledeen, of whom I've written extensively. Michael Ledeen carried out a massive spying campaign and passed military secrets to foreign governments and was never prosecuted for that. Now, Thomas McMcClarty, I've already told you about him. He was also a lawyer, and I've told you what he's done as far as giving money away to Benston Son and many others. Warren Christopher, partner in the law firm of O'Melveny and Myers. Christopher is highly regarded by the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations, and he's a hangover from the Carter administration. And Christopher will be Clinton's controller in the manner of President Roosevelt's Mandel Hayes, and of President Wilson that should be, and Roosevelt's Bernard Baruch. Roger Altman earned his stripes in the Carter era as Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, so it does not come as a surprise that he is in again, given the power of the Blackstone Group. The Blackstone Group, ladies and gentlemen, is a very powerful banking organization, a secret banking organization that runs and controls the finances of the United States of America. And we, the people, know nothing about this group. James Blanchard of the legal firm Werner Lipfert, Bernard, McPherson and Hand. Blanchard gave Clinton a lot of good advice based on his experience as a former governor of Michigan. Blanchard was a lobbyist for Kellogg and the pharmaceutical company Upjohn. I thought it important to point these things out to you because President Clinton, while he was stumping for office, he said he wasn't going to have any special interest groups at all in his cabinet, and that he would come down like a ton of bricks on anybody representing foreign governments. And yet here we have a long string of legal firms, every one of whom has represented scores and scores of foreign companies, lobbyists, the very people that he told the people of America he would not have in his cabinet and would not tolerate. He has them there today, ladies and gentlemen, the very same people. Samuel Berger, partner in the prestigious law firm of Washington, Hogan and Hodson. Berger was Clinton's transition overseer, and among his clients as a lobbyist were the Japanese embassy, Toyota, and Lloyd's of London, the big insurance brokers. And Thomas Hogg, as chairman of Hill and Knowlton, Hogg will make it hard for Clinton to keep his promise not to allow officials of his administration to become lobbyists for foreign governments once they leave government service. His lobbying of the Congress in favor of the United States going to war on behalf of British petroleum interests in Kuwait and the Rumelia oil fields remains a classic of how to lie to Congress and get away with it. No doubt the services of Hill and Knowlton will come in very handy if ever the United States government is called upon to explain how it is that we belabored Iraq at the drop of a hat on the grounds of protecting the Kurds, when at the very same time we allowed Turkish warplanes to bomb the daylights out of Kurdish towns and villages along the borders of Turkey. Did you know that, ladies and gentlemen? We inflicted a no-fly zone on northern Iraq, supposedly under color of United Nations resolutions. And let me tell you right here and now, we do not belong to the United Nations. Everything that Bush did under the color of UN regulations was false. He had no mandate ever to go to war against Iraq from we the people. It requires a very specific declaration of war. And the no-fly zone in the northern part of Iraq was installed merely so that one day that part of Iraq can be hived off in the same way as the southern part was hived off and given to British Petroleum so that British Petroleum could exploit the rich Rumelia oil fields. Now, in the northern no-fly zone, we have the richest unexploited oil fields in the world, the Mosul oil fields. Now, you won't see that on CNN, nor will you see it in your history books, but I've done extensive work and research in this, and you'll find it in my works, such as the case against the petroleum industry and an examination of the Gulf War, the facts behind the Gulf War. So we've gone in there and we've drawn a line across northern Iraq, supposedly to protect the interests of the Kurdish population, while at the same time the Turkish Air Force has been allowed to bomb the Kurdish villages along the border because they say the Kurdish guerrillas are crossing over into Turkey and attacking their police posts. This, while we send our planes to bomb Iraq, ostensibly because they are attacking the Kurds. Does Mr. Bush care about the Kurds? No, he doesn't. We have 3 times incited them to revolt against President Hussein, and 3 times we've abandoned them. What is at stake here are the richest oil fields in the world, and we've drawn this line across there, and what is going to happen, ladies and gentlemen, that we will soon be depriving Iraq of its rightful position, its lands, its national sovereignty is being violated, solely so that British Petroleum and the other petroleum giants can gain access to the richest oil fields in the world, the Mosul oil fields. That is what the so-called no-fly exclusion zone was all about. And I thought, I had the faintest of faint hopes that perhaps there might be a spark of decency in President Clinton, and he might say, well, look, we can't do this. This is a sovereign nation. But he's made it perfectly clear that he is going right ahead with the policy of the Bush administration, which is to go to war for and on behalf of the petroleum industry, particularly British Petroleum, which is one of the flagship companies of the Committee of 300. Now, the man who's in charge of promoting this no-fly zone and the man who's told us that we have to go to war against Iraq to protect democracy in Kuwait was this very same man, Thomas Hoog, as chairman of Hill and Knowlton, and he spent something like $1 million of Kuwaiti money to get the United States to go to war against Iraq, a nation that had never done us any harm at all, and kill 1 million Iraqi people, and spend something like almost $1,000 billion on this war, and told us that the other nations would contribute their share towards this war. I asked the General Accounting Office just a few days ago to give me any information they had concerning the amounts of money paid by our so-called coalition partners. They said so far 20% of what they promised has been paid. And here's another thing. At the very time that we were saying, well, Saudi Arabia and the other Arab countries support us, the United States government gave Saudi Arabia a loan of $22 billion as an inducement to get them to go to war against Iraq. The man in charge who helped with all of that propaganda is Thomas Hoog, and he is now one of Clinton's top advisors in the White House. Zoe Baird, formerly of the law firm O'Melvin and Myers, the same firm that 3 of the previous advisors come from. Baird was the Attorney General for General Electric and the Giant Aetna Insurance Company, and she will get the job of the Attorney General. This is a bit of prophecy on my part because this was written before she was actually confirmed. Although no one knows why, she's totally lacking experience that would qualify for her for the job. Her husband, Paul Gerwitz, is said to be a constitutional lawyer, but he isn't running for any political office. Perhaps Gerwitz will offer his wife help and advice from the sidelines. There is a strong suspicion that co-President Hillary made the choice of Baird against a lot of objections inside the Clinton camp. As one writer put it, Hillary seems to think government should be a mix of NOW, that's the National Women's Organization, the NAACP, and the American Bar Association. And let me tell you, that is precisely what the Clinton administration is composed of. That is a government that is going to give us 4 years of total disaster. Until 1995, our total economic system will implode. And I've written many papers on economics, explaining exactly why and how this will happen. But the subject is complex, and it's too big a subject for me to go into tonight. But that is the cabinet of the man who said, I'm an outsider, and when I get to Washington, I'm going to throw all those insiders out of office. I'm going to cast them all out. I'm going to have a house cleaning. He has filled his cabinet with top-ranking lawyers, top-ranking people who were lobbyists for the top-ranking companies. And he's broken 10 promises so far that he's made to the United States electorate. President Clinton is merely a puppet for the secret government, the Committee of 300, and he will carry out their orders. That is why he was chosen by J. Rockefeller 2 years before anybody had ever considered him to be a serious candidate for office. That is the kind of government that we are going to have. Ann Wexler, she served in the Carter administration, and she's another choice of co-president Hillary. She is amongst the most prominent, preeminent Washington lobbyists. Among her clients are the government of Poland, General Motors, Allied Signals, and the Japanese Matsushita company who bought out MCA. One of the major transactions in this world was the acquisition of Japanese interests of the massive company MCA. This woman, Ann Wexler, represented special interest groups and lobbied on their behalf with the Bush administration. She is now in the Clinton cabinet. And this is a man who said, I will get rid of all lobbyists, there will be no lobbyists in my cabinet, and anybody who goes and joins my government has to sign a pledge that 5 years after leaving service is the earliest that they can become a lobbyist. His cabinet is filled with lobbyists, filled with lawyers, filled with people who have no interest in the well-being of we the people, filled with people who are prepared to sell out the United States of America to the secret government, the oil industries, and that is precisely what the Clinton administration will do. We have another beauty here. Her name is Paula Stern. Stern and her husband Paul London have been close friends of Clinton and his wife Hillary for many years. Stern served on the International Trade Commission and acted as lobbyist and representative of a number of Japanese firms. In 1992, Stern and London were appointed to represent Mexico in pushing for acceptance of the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. It is said that their highly favorable report influenced Clinton to announce his support for the agreement. I can't go into the pros and cons of NAFTA, except to say that it is one of the biggest trade disasters ever to hit America. It's going to cost millions and millions of jobs as industries move to Mexico, and more Americans are cast upon the scrap heap. It's not a case of this coming out of a recession and those people will get their jobs back. Those jobs are lost forever, ladies and gentlemen. And your new president has put his seal of approval on one of the most iniquitous trade agreements ever to come into being in this country. It is a total sellout to the one world government and will deprive America of millions of jobs. We already have 40 million people unemployed in this country. I'm not talking about the government figures of 7%, 9%. I'm talking about the real unemployment situation. 40 million people, ladies and gentlemen, are unemployed in America today. We have 4 million people homeless. And here we are spending $100 million on dumping cruise missiles on what was, after all, simply a factory installation making agricultural machinery to satisfy the whim of a megalomaniac, President George Bush. And we now have the new president saying, I will follow exactly the same policy. That's what it cost us to dump those cruise missiles on a factory making agricultural implements. $100 million. And we have 4 million homeless. We have 40 million unemployed. Our schools are overcrowded. The teachers cannot keep up with the curriculum because they have too many children to teach. And here we are dishing money out. And it will be the same thing with all these lobbyists in power. It goes on and on. Dennis Ifshin Ifshin acted as legal counsel for the Clinton Election Committee. I want you to notice the very important position that this man occupied. I repeat it, he was the general legal counsel for the Clinton Election Committee. He was a very, very successful lobbyist for a number of foreign governments, but was known best as the legal counsel for the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, whose president, David Steiner, made a remark that was not appreciated by the Clinton camp because it happened to be right on target and the truth. The gist of which was that AIPAC had a number of people in the Clinton office who could easily influence the choice of who would be Secretary of State. Here we have a man working for a foreign government who gets a friend of his to blithely and publicly announce, look, we have enough power to tell the future President of the United States who he will appoint to the most powerful position other than that of the President. Ladies and gentlemen, this is America 1993. This is not some pipe dream, some fairy story. When are we ever going to wake up? Our President, the last one, sold us out completely, and the new one is going to do an even better job. And you can see this by the people that he's appointed to his cabinet. But perhaps the last and most important one of all is Dennis Weatherstone. Now, I don't think there's anybody in this audience who's heard of Dennis Weatherstone. If you are, then you are amongst the ranks of the best informed people in America. Because if you question 10,000 people and ask them who Dennis Weatherstone is, they tell you, I don't know. Although he was not in the crowd of that kind of people here tonight, who Clinton boasted about as being ordinary folk from Arkansas, but who were not. One of the people who President-elect Clinton, this was written before his election, who has no doubt already met, is London-born Dennis Weatherstone, Chief Executive Officer of J.P. Morgan. In several of the many monographs I've written about banking, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, and in my book, The Committee of 300, I frequently mentioned Weatherstone as the conduit through which instructions from London to quote our, unquote, Secretary of State are always delivered. Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, this is a fact of life. We are not free. Anybody in this audience who thinks that the United States is free is laboring under a terrible delusion. Our orders, our foreign policy, our domestic policy are not made in the United States. They're made in Chatham House in London, which is the headquarters of the Royal Institute for International Affairs, a secret government of immense power. And those orders are transmitted through Dennis Weatherstone of J.P. Morgan, and daily our Secretary of State goes like a little messenger boy and gets his orders from what he's supposed to do from London. And we call ourselves a free nation. We are not free. J.P. Morgan flies the British flag over Wall Street. Mr. Morgan Bank is stronger than ever, and it is the only bank that never lost its AAA credit rating. The Saudis and the Kuwaitis got loans from Morgan to tide them over the costs of the war. And Ahmed Abdul Qadir, who was Kuwait's chief debt officer, was ordered to deal with Morgan, according to my economic intelligence monitoring source. Clinton has already demonstrated that he is an excellent order taker, so he and co-president Hillary should get on very well with Weatherstone, particularly given Clinton's Oxford experience. Ladies and gentlemen, in the time that has been allocated to me, I've done my best to show you that far from being an outsider, President-elect Clinton, now President Clinton, is very much a Washington insider. One of the chief contributors in the very early stages of his campaign was the Stevens family. The man is called King Stevens, and he runs the largest banking empire outside of New York. King Stevens, when he was told by J. Rockefeller, look, Clinton is our man, he lent I use that in the loosest possible term, he lent Clinton $2 million to kick off his election campaign. And where did the money come from? Stevens was the man who brought the BCCI to America, which banking scandal is going to cost you, the taxpayer, far in excess of what you already have to fork out
for the savings and loan debacle. You are going to pay the debt that BCCI ran up in the United States, billions of dollars. You're going to pay it, not Mr. King Stevens. Mr. King Stevens is an insider of President Clinton because he gave Clinton millions of dollars right from the very start to get him going, get him running for this presidential election. And the money came straight out of the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, BCCI. And the only man to expose that, besides myself, was Congressman Henry Gonzalez, and he exposed him because I wrote and told him so, and I gave him all the facts. Nothing was done to challenge Clinton once during his congressional hearings, during those times when he was out on the stump, when reporters were asking him the most innocuous and silly questions like, what color hats does your wife like to wear? Not one of them said, Mr. Clinton, where did you get the money from to start your campaign? Another huge contributor was the Walmart king. All the insiders. Clinton's wife's law firm ran all of the bond issues for the state of Arkansas. Her legal firm handled all of King Stevens exclusively, their huge banking business. And this man, Clinton, went on the stump and he told the American people, I'm an outsider. I represent you. I want your vote because when I get to Washington, I am going to change things. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, that is one thing Mr. Clinton will do. It is one promise that he will keep. He will preside over the dissolution and the destruction of this once great nation. And that will happen in 1995 when the banks implode, our credit is destroyed, when we have something like 50 million people unemployed, and we are no longer able to function as a country. And the godless Antichrist will step forward and say, I can get you out of this mess. But one thing you've got to do, you have to forget all about this constitutional nonsense. I have to have unparalleled power, and I will get you out of this mess. And unfortunately, the figures that I got from a friend of mine who has close contacts with the CIA is that 87% of the American public will go for that deal. They will allow a dictator of the worst kind to step forward to return to them some of the bread and circuses that they have lost. They will go for a short-term solution rather than endure and stand by their Constitution. In 1776, only 3% of the patriots of this country came forward and stood up against the might of King George III. Today, we probably don't even have that number of people who would be willing to come out and stand up and be counted. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to warn you, and I have a record of almost 2 decades of very, very accurate forecasting of events. Some of my forecasts have been 5 years ahead of anything anybody's ever said. And people have laughed at me and they said, what happened to what you said 3 years ago? But today they're not laughing. And let me tell you that the president that we have now was chosen because of his willingness to go along with the godless Antichrist, one world government, and to betray the United States and preside over the downfall and the destruction of this country unless we the people stand up and be counted and take back some of the power that we have so meekly given away to our oppressors. Thank you.